continue on to the Jain speakers section. Up first, we have Dr. Jankna Jina Shah. She grew up in a Jain vegetarian household surrounded by books on Jain philosophy, Gurudev Chittubhanuji, who many of you may have known of, and others. She has been active in YJP and now is the chair of the Ahimsak Eco-Vegan Committee of Jaina. She's been vegan since 1990 and a physician since 1995. She and her husband administer their educational not-for-profit blog, veganjains.com, with posts on health and compassion aspects of veganism. Next year, they look forward to volunteering to improve health and environmental conditions in urban slums near Gandhi Ashram with the NGO Manav Sadhana. Please welcome Dr. Jina.
As Nilesh is queuing up my slides, first I want to just acknowledge our appreciation for Kim, for Anne, and for Jack, who's back here, because we really appreciate you all taking time to come and talk to the Jain community. And I know we didn't have time for questions right after Kim's, but we'll leave some time at the end of all of the panels. And so if you have had questions for Kim, save them, and we'll give you time to ask those questions. I'm going to talk about a couple of different topics, and the first thing I'm going to talk about is the relationship between Jainism and veganism. So we've seen our presentations about what happens with the dairy cows, with the egg production. Most of us are already vegetarian, and this isn't the first time that I've talked to the Jain community or that people in the Jain community have heard about veganism. Some people have a little bit of a reaction now. It seems that we've been talking about this for a few years, and there's sometimes, almost like if you give someone an item that might induce an allergic reaction, people sometimes have an allergic reaction, it seems, and they say, Jainism is not the same as veganism. And so I want to break this down in terms of my understanding, and I'd like to hear people's reactions at the end of the three presentations, and think about what you've seen in the last three and what's coming up. So, does veganism mean Jainism? So just for review, most of us know this, having been raised Jain. We have a set of teachings that places nonviolence at the very top of our moral value. Ahimsa Parama Dharma. Nonviolence is the highest religion. Parasparo Bagraho Jivanam. All living beings are interdependent. We are told in our sutras by our last in the line of 24 teachers, Bhagavan Mahavira, one should not injure, subjugate, enslave, torture, or kill any living being, including animals, plants, or insects. As per the Jain scriptures, limited violence to one-sense beings, to the extent necessary for survival, such as vegetables, water, fire, earth, and air, are allowed only by Jain lay people, as we are called Sravaks and Sravikas. So in the Jain system of biology, living beings have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 senses. The 5 sense beings are mobile beings like us, like other animals, and the 1 sense are the non-mobile with only the sense of touch. Violence to the 5 sense beings, Panchendriyas, including humans, including animals, is considered prohibited for all of us. And it is our rationale for being vegetarian. Furthermore, there's a set of instructions in our Pratikarana Sutra, Lesson 7 on Nonviolence, acts that should be known and avoided. We should not be tying animals where it could hurt them or put them in cages where there's no freedom. Beating them with sticks or any other means is prohibited. Piercing them, making them carry a load, depriving them of food and shelter. So we know that these are not Jain actions. So what is veganism? You've heard from 3 speakers talking about veganism, and there are various types of vegans. There are dietary vegans that refrain from consuming animal products, including eggs, dairy, and other animal-derived substances. There are ethical vegans who not only follow a vegan diet, but also extend the philosophy into other areas of their lives. Some might say that that's really what veganism is, that it can't be just dietary. It makes sense also not to wear leather or use animals for any other purpose. They're not our property. And there are environmental vegans, and this refers a lot to motivation. So the motivations for these types of vegans may be to reject the use of animal products on the premise that the industrial practice is environmentally damaging and unsustainable. An aspect that the other three speakers probably didn't have time to address, but we know is important, is that factory farming of animals releases a huge amount of methane gas. It's very water intensive. There are environmental impacts that just on those grounds alone make it very desirable to be a vegan. So why do Jains use dairy? Well, in the past, before the birth of high-tech dairy farms, it's possible that the cows were treated like a part of the family. This is what we think of as the traditional family cow in India and the villages. And after feeding the calf, leftover milk was consumed by humans. The scale of violence may have been much less. However, there is even a restriction in traditional Jainism. Dairy foods are among the foods considered vigai, along with oils and spices that are considered rich foods to be avoided during one of our fasting practices known as ambel. So there is even a type of fasting which we don't consume dairy. And I'm very grateful to these slides, which were prepared by another member of the HIMSA Eco-Vegan Committee, and I modified it slightly. But you see here sort of a diagram showing how our various dietary practices overlap. Where you see Jain food-related practices, the circle to your left, these are the things that we're likely familiar with. We're vegetarian. Because of the concern with even violence to one-sensed animals, strict Jains avoid root vegetables. We don't want to uproot the whole plant and kill all the life around it. And there's also a belief that there are many souls living in the body of these root vegetables. We do not eat after sunset in order to avoid violence to the insects that might fly into our mouths and to avoid atmospheric violence. And there are practices such as eating less than what is absolutely necessary, nodari, and ambel, which I mentioned, eating once, non-rich foods, pulses and grains, and other fasting, only water, eating once, eating twice, etc. So that's kind of what we think of, and there may be more, but that's kind of the major Jain-related food practices, right? And then if you look on the rightmost circle, dietary vegan core practices, they use non-dairy, non-egg, non-meat products, right? And where do these overlap? In the middle, we see Jain and vegan common practices. None of us use meat, none of us use eggs or fish. Honey, strictly is prohibited even in the Jain diet, and so is leather. So people can, in fact, practice both. Some people argue in the Jain community that why do you care about cows? We are supposed to be Jain. We should not we should not kill or eat potatoes and onions and garlic. If you feel strongly, do both. This lunch that we're about to have avoids both root vegetables and dairy. We're avoiding violence to 5-sense beings, cows, and to the extent possible, 1-sense beings for root vegetables. There's no contradiction. You can be traditional Jain and follow all of these practices and also remove the dairy and the eggs. So now, before I move to the next part, I want to just go back to this point about ethical vegans, because I think the next paper will help us to expand. So I was talking a lot about the food part. There are also aspects of the vegan lifestyle beyond food. And so I'm going to introduce our next speaker. How much time do we have?
You have 8 minutes.
Okay, we have 8 minutes. So actually, before I introduce the next speaker, I'll just pause and see if there are any questions. And you also will have an opportunity to ask questions later. So I'll just pause for a minute. And I'm going to first see if there's someone who hasn't asked a question before, and they'll come back if the only person that's raising their hand is someone who's asked a question before. So first, if you could raise your hand if you haven't asked a question before, we'll take that question first. Okay.
So why don't we profess or why don't we implement vegan diet in Jain temples?
The question is, why don't we encourage a vegan diet in Jain temples? And I guess we're in the process of doing that right now. Okay, go ahead.
You mentioned the legume plants for food, but the plant, if you see, it bears fruit just for the purpose of propagation, and then it has and you eat vegetables which are fruits. So you're not hurting the plants or killing them. And also after they produce it, then they die. So when you get grain and all that, so that also seems more ethical than killing animals just for food and
So I think the comment was made that it's more ethical to be eating plants, which you don't have to kill. You can take parts of the fruit or stem and you can eat that plant.
Those are meant for propagation, they drop off.
Even though these are items that are meant for propagation, we agree. And let me just ask a question to the whole audience before I transfer to the next speaker. So how many people here are vegetarian? Almost everybody, which I would expect in a Jain group, okay? And how many people avoid root vegetables? I do sometimes when I can, like in the Jain temple. Great, okay, so you guys avoid root vegetables. And how many people are already vegan now? Great. Kind of, some people are on the way, that's great. And are there people here who generally try to avoid both root vegetables and dairy, including eggs? And so we have some too. So you see, we have the whole spectrum here.